Coming up on Catalyst, when the weatherman says...
We're expecting wind gusts around 60 kilometres per hour across the country.
How much notice should we really take? And bird strike. With planes and birds sharing our skies, how common are collisions and how can they be avoided?
On a clear day, July 31st, a big wind ripped down the Thredbo Valley here in the Snowy Mountains. It tipped over cars.
I was just hanging on.
Made a policewoman fly.
It was a bit scary.
Killed a pony.
Broke her neck instantly. It was very sad.
And burst the roof off Keith's house from the inside.
I was walking through the kitchen and suddenly the whole front of the house, the windows came in and managed to jump out the way. And then a second later, the whole of the roof just took off.
It makes you wonder, what kind of wind can do that? Keith would certainly like to know.
And this is where the roof ended up, around about 500 metres from the house.
Well, let's find out as we take a journey around the startling power of the wind.
Now, if you're anything like me, when you sit down to watch the weather report at night...
Wind gusts up to around 60 kilometres per hour. 90 kilometres per hour. Gusts around 110 kilometres per hour.
You have no idea what all those wind speeds really mean. So, wheel out the wind machine and crank it up to 11. We're going to show you exactly what wind speed can do what.
We've set up here a typical backyard and we'll see at what wind speed things start to go awry. Observing, we have wind damage expert Mark Edwards and from the BOM, Harold Richter.
Let the wind blow!
That's 20 k's. Now we're up to 60. It's amazing how overexcited you can get when it's not your own property.
The dog kennel's gone a long way. Yeah. Poor dog.
And believe it or not, at just 60 kilometres an hour, it's already all over.
So 60 kilometre an hour winds we would consider gale force winds, so it's something that happens fairly often around Australia.
These sort of winds don't usually cause damage, but as we saw in the simulation, in our backyard where we have light things with a reasonable sail area, they can be pushed around like patio furniture, it can overturn trampolines.
So a 60k wind is enough to wreak havoc on a modern yard, with flying debris maybe smashing a window. Crank it up now. Let's see what happens at 90.
"90 kilometre an hour winds is broadly the threshold that we would call damaging winds.
Of course, once you get to 90 k's, it's hard for an able-bodied person to walk around outside. And at that wind, the trampoline's now in the neighbour's place, and that dog kennel will tumble with the dog in it. So you might want to bring the dog inside too.
So if a wind gust of 90 kilometres an hour is enough to knock me off my feet, how much wind does it take to lift a person off the ground altogether?
So we have here one dog, one small child, and me. And we're going to see at what wind speed each of us becomes airborne. You ready?
To deal with these higher speeds, we've switched to an indoor vertical wind machine because it's safer and, I suspect, more fun. Here we go. And the dog's gone, much to the delight of my young co-flyer. Now the small child. She's right off the ground at a wind speed of 120 kilometres an hour.
Once you move up to 120 kilometres per hour, now things start to go wrong. You've reached the threshold of damage for older, more vulnerable homes. It also happens to be the threshold of damage for some garage doors on modern homes. As they're breached, the pressure of the wind can get into the garage, increasing the chance of losing your roof.
The most important thing to understand about a wind's speed and its force is that it's not a linear relationship. For each doubling of the wind speed, the force goes up fourfold. In other words, what might seem like a small increase in wind speed delivers a massive lift in sheer power. And here I go, at 140 kilometres an hour. Just 20 k's more than it took to lift a kid a third my weight. To be honest, this is sobering. I never imagined 140 kilometre winds capable of this. And these winds are in the ballpark of what drove through the Thredbo Valley on July 31st. We know because as it happened, a number of locals recorded it. Simon was driving at 90 kilometres an hour when he felt his car pushed from behind.
And then the debris sort of started hitting the car.
You must have been hanging onto the steering wheel for grim death.
I was, yes, yep.
Wind gusts well over 90 kilometres an hour were enough to push a car off the road, and a few were that day. But the gusts that struck this part of the valley were even stronger.
Hit the house and the whole house shook, and then you could hear it move away. And it was like, well, that was a really big one. So I came down and checked my weather station, and sure enough, that's my new high standard, 187 k's.
187 kilometres an hour.
Yeah.
And that was the wind that was enough to make Keith's entire roof fly.
Because once you've got to 180 k's, you have now exceeded the design wind speed for ordinary homes. So you're going to see widespread damage to older homes and significant damage to even modern structures that have benefited from current building regulations.
We got the kids out, and that was the main thing.
Yeah, no one was hurt.
So what caused such freak winds? Especially on a blue sky day. Even the locals used to mountain weather can't recall its like. In fact, it's so out of the box, it prompted our man from the Bureau to conduct some serious investigative meteorology on Keith's behalf, and he's ready to reveal all.
So, Keith, Harold's been doing some excellent detective work for us.
All right. Yeah, we did some investigative work. When we first heard what actually happened at your farm, it was surprising, especially the wind strength was surprising because it was effectively an event with a clear sky. There were a few clouds around, but it wasn't the classic setup where you had a big cyclone or a thunderstorm. So we started the investigation with this chart here.
This is the actual chart, hand-drawn by Bureau meteorologists as the event unfolded. The thing to note here is this massive temperature difference.
Sydney had shorts and t-shirt weather with 25 degrees, whereas Melbourne was 9 degrees only, right? So you had a temperature difference there between the two cities of 16 degrees. In short, we have really cold air over here, we have really warm air over here, and they are in fairly close proximity to each other. What that means overall is fairly strong winds.
Temperature gradients are the most common cause of big winds, responsible for what you and I know as cold fronts or southerly busters. The extreme temperature gradient, July 31st, caused an arc of powerful winds from WA right across to New South Wales. But here in the mountains that day, there was one extra extraordinary factor.
And Thredbo Top Station recorded a maximum wind gust of 150 kilometres per hour.
Normally, wind speeds are higher the higher you are in the sky, which is why Thredbo Top Station at 2,000 metres above sea level regularly gets strong winds. But this time, the winds were strongest in the valley. A mystery. Until Harold had a brainwave.
Our aha moment was when we started to realise there was what we call a mountain wave.
Yeah.
So this is air that is forced over the mountain, doesn't want to go over the mountain, but it is forced over it, and it starts to go up and down on the other side of the mountain.
Unfamiliar here, mountain waves are a well-known phenomenon in the American Rockies. In certain conditions high in the sky, the air currents form big waves exactly like on the ocean. And sometimes the waves become so steep, the mountains act like a reef and the waves actually break. Tumbling into the valleys, a churning foam of wind.
It breaks, it's like an ocean wave, it breaks, and when it breaks, it can create very brief moments of very, very strong winds.
In all Harold's years at the Bureau, never before has he heard a report in Australia of such a powerful breaking mountain wave.
We're actually getting them. This is the first real case where we're getting those clear sky winds that head up there towards 200 kilometers an hour. So it is, it's a bit groundbreaking in that sense.
Literally.
Literally, yeah. Was it that strong?
Good on you, Keith. Black humour in the face of adversity.
So if a wind gust of 180 kilometres an hour can do this, what kind of power do you get inside a tornado?
If you'd asked me a year ago whether we get tornadoes in Australia, I'd have said no. That was before 2 tornadoes ripped past my house in the middle of the night.
The wind woke me up. But that's nothing to the shocking awakening experienced by Karen Van Druten, nearby in the peaceful south of Sydney beach town of Kiama.
Suddenly there was a God Almighty explosion, and of course being in the bed, the first thing I did was pull the doona over my head and go into a fetal position, and everything rained down on me, and I was hanging on to whatever I could, including hanging on with my knuckles into the mattress.
The wind had removed her roof and 3 of her walls, leaving just half a wall and Karen still in her bed.
I was as if I was sitting outside.
It was a genuine Dorothy tornado.
Without the red shoes. Or probably my red shoes did fling up in it. There was enough that was flung up in it.
The tornado that nearly carried Karen away was one of 3 to hit this area that night. The second, smaller tornado damaged houses around Jamberoo. But it was the third one that was really scary, passing just south of my own home.
I came to look at it the next day and I can tell you it was jaw-dropping. This is 30-metre high forest around here. Well, there was nothing left above about 10 metres. Every branch broken off, every leaf gone, and the path was at least 200 to 300 metres wide.
The swathe of destruction tracked 12 kilometres inland, just missing 3 big towns, but hitting this property, where Ross Friend sheltered his goats in a 2.6-tonne shipping container.
And the wind picked it up there, threw it into that concrete telephone post up there and split it into 4 places.
So the wind...
With goats in it.
With goats in it?
With goats in it.
Were they okay?
Some of them were dead the next morning in the container. Others had to be put down. We put down 13 goats the next morning.
Contrary to popular belief, not only does our land of Oz get full-blown tornadoes, they're surprisingly common. Last year, Australia was hit by 60 tornado events, and they were all over. So what sort of wind speeds are we talking now? With the help of our forensic meteorologist, let's start with the weakest, the Jamberoo tornado.
This one we rated EF0, that's the weakest.
The EF he's referring to is the international scale for rating tornadoes.
EF0 already means winds can gust up to about 140 kilometers an hour. So it's really quite strong.
Enough to lift me off the ground.
Enough to lift you off the ground, that's right.
The tornado that hit Kiama and removed most of Karen's bedroom was rated EF1. That means a top wind speed of around 180 kilometres an hour. And now to the big one.
The last tornado had a path length that was at least 3 to 4 times as long as the Jamboree tornado. And this one, we rated EF2. The top speeds are now 220 kilometers an hour. This is the speed where there's a serious threat to a lot of structures. And the wind pressure now of this tornado would be well over double of that of the weakest tornado.
Remember, as wind speed doubles, its sheer power quadruples. This event was every bit as powerful as you'd find in Tornado Alley.
Great. So I was just missed by a US-sized tornado.
You could see it that way, yes. So you're quite lucky that you can conduct this interview.
Yeah.
And if I was lucky to be able to conduct this interview, what about this man?
Oh, stop. Power line just went.
This extraordinary video was taken last year near the town of Malwala on the Victoria-New South Wales border.
They're coming for us.
He's capturing part of a tornado outbreak that hammered local caravan parks and towns. These tornadoes were rated a staggering EF4. That means wind speeds of up to 300 kilometres an hour.
It's taking the power lines down.
Let's put that into perspective. This is an impact cannon, part of research by America's premier tornado science centre, the National Wind Institute. And this is what a regular plank of wood travelling at 300 kilometres an hour looks like. If I had any doubts about the power of increasing wind speed, they've been smashed. So, million-dollar question, how come we got tornadoes here?
It turns out you need 3 ingredients to make a tornado. First, you need a thunderstorm. Second, it needs to be extremely humid. Third, you need a rapid change in wind speed in the first kilometre above the ground, otherwise known as wind shear.
Then this happens. The wind shear causes the air to begin to roll. This rolling wind is then sucked up into the thunderstorm and now it's vertical. You've got yourself a tornado, or several. The critical threshold for tornadoes is a wind shear greater than 40 kilometres an hour. Harold has discovered the wind shear the night of the Kiama tornadoes was a whopping 75 k's.
We had nearly twice the value of the wind shear that we would associate with tornadoes for the Kiama event.
So next time it's really humid and there's a wind shear above 40 kilometres an hour, I should go and stay at my dad's house.
Yeah, that's maybe better sleep at your dad's house, that's
Yeah.
right, yep.
Okay.
So what have we learned from this turbulent journey through the power of the wind? Well, if there's one thing that's clear, is that nowhere in Australia is immune. And while fortunately most of us will never be hit by a tornado or a breaking mountain wave, we will all at some stage be in the path of big winds. So the next time the weatherman comes on and says,
Now, damaging wind with gusts around 110 kilometres per hour will develop tonight anywhere south of the Illawarra.
with any luck, you'll have a better appreciation of what that really means. And you might just be more inclined to do what the SES says and secure your yard properly.
60k an hour winds again, but as you can see, this time we've put everything away or staked it down. Let it rip.
And make sure you remember the dog kennel.
Thank you, sir.
All good.
We're a nation of jet setters. Close to 60 million travellers boarded a domestic flight last year, and 30 million flew abroad.
But our love of flying means that planes and wildlife are competing for space in the sky, and that is cause for concern.
Because wildlife strikes cause severe damage to aircraft, they cause ongoing costs to airline industries, and it's something that is avoidable.
Absolutely, they're seeing an increase in the number of strikes and the increased rate of strikes.
There's about 2,000 reported strikes in Australia per year, which is the highest of any sort of incident in aviation in Australia.
Wildlife strikes, or collisions between a bird or animal and an aircraft, rarely cause harm to crew or passengers on commercial flights, but they do damage planes.
It costs the civil aviation industry about $1.5 billion per annum, and that's not just the damage costs, but also the knock-on effects of delays.
Fingers crossed we don't hit any birds today. But with a national average of 4 strikes daily and over 1,700 collisions recorded this year already, it is relatively common and the risk is real.
Strikes happen most often during takeoff and landing. That's why management of wildlife in and around airports is vital.
It's really important to know what bird species it is, because different birds present different hazards to aircraft, and we can focus on species that are causing problems and have management strategies in place to help reduce that sort of issue.
Mitigating the risk means knowing which species is being hit, but finding out is not always straightforward.
So, Martin, this looks like a bird strike.
That's right. You can see around the cowling here all of the debris that's been left by when the bird's impacted with the aircraft. Obviously, we don't have a full carcass here to work with, but we've got enough remains that have smeared onto the cowling here that we can take a good sample. It's kind of like the whodunit of a crime scene. All we're left with is blood and debris, so we can send that to a DNA laboratory and get the information we need.
This detective work is the domain of Dr. Rebecca Johnson, who heads up the Centre for Wildlife Genomics at the Australian Museum.
We get quite a few samples through every week, which is actually only a fraction of the strikes that happen every day in Australia. We're looking at genes that are informative at a species level. They inform how they're related to other animals. So that's actually part of our core science that we do here at the museum. And identifying unknown animals fits in really well with that.
In addition to its genomics capabilities, the Australian Museum has access to another unique resource.
We have an incredible collection here, so we have a lot of animals, 18 million specimens in fact. And in our group, which is the genetics group, we have about 100,000 tissue samples taken from those animals, and we use DNA that we extract from those known reference materials to identify an unknown sample that's brought into the laboratory.
Rebecca shows me one such case. They start by sequencing the sample DNA.
So once you've got that, then you can compare that to a catalogue?
Yes, that's correct. And then we conduct a series of calculations that see how related it is to other species on our database and hopefully come up with a species level match. And so 100% of the time it fits into this group of species here, which is a single species, Ardea novae hollandiae.
So what's that
and
commonly known as?
That's a white-faced heron.
Right, okay.
So that's a fairly big...
Quite a big bird.
Big bird that you
wouldn't want to run into.
You'd notice if you ran into that.
But identifying the species is just the first step. Gold Coast Airport runs a 24/7 operation to keep the airspace and runways clear of animals.
With dispersal, we get out on the airfield with a number of different devices. The gun is one technique that we have that allows us to use pyrotechnics. They can project a very loud noise quite a long distance, and it's a really effective tool for use against birds, but it doesn't harm them.
But Gold Coast Airport has another unique approach to combat the problem. Australia's first purpose-trained bird strike dog.
Wait.
We brought Joe, the wonder dog, onto the team, and he's fantastic.
Okay, Joe. Deal.
Joe essentially adds a predatory influence to the program. So the bird population see Joe as simply a predator, like a fox or something like that. And so the birds are wary in that area and they'll move away from it.
Here's another tool in my kit of dispersal tools when it comes to moving birds off the airport. Where's the bird's way? Go out! Hey, good boy, Joe. Good boy.
Joe is trained not to harm the birds, but to disperse them. And while he seems to love his job, he also gets results.
Following his introduction at the airport here, we had a look at some of the statistics.
The data is pretty clear. You can see that the types of birds that he would be influencing, their numbers of strikes have decreased as well.
So why do you use so many different techniques?
It's to stop habituation. We've got lots of different sorts of birds, and you don't want those birds getting used to any one type of tool, so you need to constantly mix it up.
Winter as well is impacting on how much the grass is growing.
Yeah, but
In addition to scaring birds away, the grass is left long to reduce certain species. Specialised drains deter ducks and other water birds. But the management strategies aren't limited to the airport grounds. Just outside the airport, Field Officer Cameron Wheatman manages one of the most dangerous species, the Australian white ibis.
22% of all Australian white ibis strikes cause damage in Australia. So that can be fairly minor or it can be significant, and it can be the inclusion of damaging an entire engine.
In 1997, the ibis population reached over 5,000, presenting a serious threat to planes taking off nearby. A management plan was put in place. The program involves removing some of the nests and eggs.
No, I can see eggs.
Oh, yep. Yep, we've got 2 to 3. Yeah, we've got 3. That usually means we've got a lot of food source around and they're able to breed,
The program successfully reduced the population by 60%.
Almost there. Here it comes. Hey.
We are part of a growing community of people who work at airports all around the world, who are working at mitigating wildlife strikes with aircraft. I think we've been getting better at it and understanding the issue more, and we're moving now into new technologies that are taking the fight against birds, I guess, out of the airports and into the skies, where we can help to actually have aircraft and birds avoiding each other. So hopefully that's more of the future.
Next time on Catalyst, testing the effects of electromagnetic interference on our military aircraft, detecting the cane toads of the waterways, tilapia, and the dangers of laser pointers. Connect with Catalyst on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and our website.